I still remember the way the snow fell that night, soft, patient, as if the sky itself was too tired to fight the silence. The streets were quiet, painted in silver light, and every window I passed glowed with a warmth that didn't belong to me anymore. Inside those houses, people were laughing, holding hands, cutting pies, unwrapping gifts. Families. Real families. And me. I was just a man walking home from a place that once felt like home. Christmas Eve, the one night of the year when the world pretends to remember love. But for me, it had become a reminder of everything I had lost. The warmth, the laughter, the voice that used to call my name, all gone, buried under years of distance and words that should have never been said. My name is Edward Lane. I'm 65, a widower, a father, though I'm not sure my son still calls me that in his heart. I used to drive trucks for a living. Spent half my life on the road, believing that bringing home gifts was the same as being present. But when you spend too long chasing miles, you end up losing faces. And by the time I realized that, it was already too late. That night, I went to my son's house with a small box in my hands, inside it, an old pocket watch that once belonged to his mother. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be a bridge between us. The house was beautiful, full of light and laughter. But when he opened the door, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, hesitation. Then he said those words. "Dad, this dinner is for family only." For a few seconds, I stood there, smiling like I didn't understand. But I did. I understood every syllable. The door closed softly, almost politely, and the snow began to fall harder. I remember the sound, the faint click of the latch, the muffled laughter inside, the ache in my chest. I turned and started walking, one slow step after another, not sure where I was going. People think heartbreak is loud. It isn't. It's quiet, almost holy. Like the world holding its breath just long enough for you to feel how empty it can be. That night, I didn't know that the road I took, that lonely, frozen road, would lead me to something far greater than pain. Something that would change everything. But before I tell you that story, let me ask you this: where are you listening from tonight? Are you alone too, or sitting beside someone you love? Tell me, because this story is for you. I don't remember feeling cold when I first left his porch. Maybe I was too numb for that. The kind of numb that doesn't come from the weather, but from words you can't unhear. My boots sank into the snow as I walked down the quiet street, the sky hanging low, swollen with clouds that looked ready to burst. Every step sounded like a memory breaking, soft, distant, final. I had spent the whole day getting ready for that dinner. Polished my shoes, ironed my shirt, even wrapped the old pocket watch in a piece of velvet. The house had smelled like pine and dust, the kind of scent that lives in places that are too quiet for too long. I'd rehearsed what I would say when I saw him, how proud I was, how I didn't need much, how just being there would be enough. I thought maybe he'd smile, offer me a chair, pour me a glass of wine. I never thought the door would close instead. I reached the end of the street and stopped under a flickering lamppost. Across from me, through a wide living room window, I saw a family gathered around a glowing tree. The father lifted his daughter, helping her place the star on top. The mother clapped, laughing. For a moment, I imagined that was us. Me, my late wife Anna, and little Thomas, his hair sticking up, his laughter so loud it filled the whole room. Anna used to say Christmas was her favorite kind of noise. I never understood what she meant back then. I kept walking until the houses grew farther apart and the lights dimmed. The snow had started to stick to my coat, my scarf damp and heavy. A part of me wanted to go home, sit in my old chair, and pretend it was just another night. But another part, the stubborn, foolish part, couldn't stop thinking about the sound of that door. I passed by a bakery, closed early for the holiday. In the window, someone had left a small candle burning beside a tray of gingerbread men. The smell reached me even through the cold, sweet, warm, like a whisper from another time. I thought of the Christmas Anna and I burned a whole batch of cookies because we'd forgotten them in the oven. We laughed so hard that night, sitting on the floor, eating the few that survived. That was 20 years ago. Maybe more. Time becomes strange when you've got no one waiting for you. By the time I reached the church at the corner of Maple Street, the bells had started ringing. Midnight. The sound echoed through the empty streets, bouncing off the snow. I hesitated by the gate. The doors were open, and a few candles flickered near the altar. I hadn't been inside a church since Anna's funeral. But something in me, or maybe someone, pulled me in. The warmth hit me first. Then the silence. Inside, there were only a handful of people, heads bowed, eyes closed. I sat in the last pew, trying to disappear into the shadows. A man in a gray coat stood near the front, tall, older, his face softened by kindness. He wasn't preaching, just sitting there, as if waiting for something. Later, I'd learn his name was Father Gabriel. I didn't pray. I just sat there, staring at the flickering candles, the faint scent of incense curling through the air. Somewhere deep inside, a thought whispered, "You weren't rejected, Edward. You were sent." Sent where? I didn't know. Maybe to face myself. Maybe to understand that love isn't about being invited in. Sometimes it's about finding light after being left outside. When I finally stood to leave, the priest looked at me. He didn't say a word, but his eyes seemed to know everything. I nodded, and he nodded back. That was enough. Outside again, the wind had calmed, and the snow had turned to a slow, steady fall. The world looked softer, quieter, like it was holding its breath. I tucked my hands into my coat and started walking again, though I had no idea where I was heading. Maybe toward home. Maybe away from it. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement by the park bench near the frozen fountain. A small figure, hunched over, shivering beneath a thin jacket. At first, I thought it was a bundle of clothes someone had left behind. But then it moved. A boy. Couldn't have been more than 10. His knees were pulled to his chest, his face hidden under a wool hat too big for his head. I hesitated, the kind of hesitation that comes when your heart knows it's about to be asked for more than it can give. But then the wind lifted, and he looked up. His eyes were wide, scared, but there was something else there, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. I took a slow step toward him. "Hey," I said softly, my voice breaking the quiet. He flinched, then looked away. His hands were red from the cold. I glanced around. No one else in sight. No cars. No laughter. Just us, an old man and a boy, both out of place on Christmas night. I took off my gloves and handed them to him. He hesitated, then slipped them on. They swallowed his hands completely. Neither of us spoke again for a long while. We just sat there, the snow falling around us, two strangers sharing the same silence. And in that stillness, I realized something. Maybe this was where I was meant to be. Maybe this, not the dinner, not the lights, not the warm house that shut me out, was where Christmas truly began. The boy didn't speak for a long time. He just kept his eyes on the snow, watching it gather on his shoes, his lashes, his trembling hands inside my oversized gloves. The wind had grown softer, as if even it was too tired to howl anymore. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was the kind that feels heavy, full of things neither of us knew how to say. After a while, I sat beside him. The bench was cold enough to make my legs ache, but I didn't move. "You shouldn't be out here," I said quietly. He didn't answer. "Where's home?" I asked again. "Nothing." He pressed his lips together, staring straight ahead. I sighed. "All right," I muttered, pulling my coat tighter. "You can sit here as long as you need. But you'll freeze if you stay all night." He finally turned his head. There was something cautious in his expression, a mix of fear and curiosity, like he was trying to decide whether I was safe. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "You got anywhere warm to go?" That question cut deeper than I expected. I looked toward the church at the end of the street, its candles glowing faintly through the stained glass. "Not really," I said. "But I've got a place that's dry." He nodded, slowly, then stood up. He was smaller than I thought, the sleeves of his jacket torn, shoes soaked through. When he stepped closer, I noticed a small piece of paper sticking out from his pocket. A folded envelope, worn and crumpled, as if it had been carried for a long time. "What's your name?" I asked. "Noah," he murmured. "My name's Noah." "All right, Noah." "I'm Edward." He nodded again, barely looking at me, and followed as I started walking. The snow squeaked under our feet, our breaths forming tiny ghosts in the cold air. When we reached my small house at the edge of town, I hesitated at the gate. The sound of it closing behind us, that sharp, metallic click, made me flinch. It reminded me too much of the sound of my son's door earlier that night. The same soft finality, the same quiet rejection. But this time, I was the one closing it, keeping someone in, not out. Inside, the house smelled of wood and old coffee. The lights were dim, and the fire in the hearth had nearly gone out. I stirred it back to life, the flames stretching weakly at first, then growing stronger, painting the walls in gold and amber. Noah stood near the doorway, unsure whether to step further in. "You can sit," I said, gesturing toward the chair closest to the fire. He obeyed, still silent, his small hands extended toward the warmth. The sight of him there, trembling, thin, alone, twisted something in me. I went to the kitchen, poured what was left of the cocoa powder into a pot, added milk, and let it warm. The scent filled the room, soft and sweet, and for a second, it didn't feel so empty anymore. When I handed him the cup, he held it carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. "Thank you," he said, his voice still barely there. "You got family somewhere?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just my mom. But she doesn't want me around tonight." The way he said it, flat, practiced, made my chest tighten. I sat across from him, watching the fire reflect in his eyes. "You sure about that?" He hesitated. "She said I ruin everything." I looked down. The words hit too close to home. I thought of Thomas, his face at the door, the disappointment behind his eyes. How many times had I made him feel the same way? How many times had I told him to go to bed so I could work a few more hours? How many Christmases had I ruined by not showing up? I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "people say things they don't mean. Especially when they're hurting. But that doesn't mean you don't matter." He didn't answer, but I saw the way his shoulders softened, the way his eyes lifted, just for a second. We sat there for a long time, listening to the fire crackle. I could hear the old clock ticking on the shelf, the same one Anna bought the year Thomas was born. Time used to move so fast in this house. Now it just lingered, dragging its feet. When Noah finally fell asleep in the chair, I covered him with an old quilt and stood by the window. Outside, the world looked still, buried in white. The streets were empty, the stars faint. Somewhere far away, fireworks cracked faintly in celebration of a day that didn't feel much like one. I thought about calling Thomas. About apologizing, even if I didn't know for what. But the image of that door stopped me. Maybe some doors are meant to stay closed for a while, until you learn how to knock again. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered a small prayer I hadn't said in years, not for myself, but for the boy sleeping in my chair. The next morning, when I woke up, Noah was gone. The blanket was folded neatly, the gloves placed on the table. And the envelope, the one that had been in his pocket, lay where he'd been sitting. My hand shook as I picked it up. It was addressed to someone named Dad. And in that moment, standing in the quiet of my old living room, I realized that maybe I hadn't met that boy by accident. Maybe the sound of one gate closing had led me straight to another, one that still had a chance to open. The envelope trembled in my hands. It was light, almost weightless, but something about it felt heavy, like holding someone's last try. The handwriting was uneven, the letters too big, like a child still learning how to express things they didn't have the words for yet. It simply read, "To Dad." I didn't open it. Not then. Maybe I was afraid it wasn't meant for me. Or maybe I was afraid that, in some strange way, it was. I spent the next few hours walking through the house, unsure what to do with myself. The smell of cocoa still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the cold breeze that had slipped in when I opened the door earlier that morning, hoping to find Noah still sitting there. But he was gone, like a dream you're not sure you really had. By noon, the snow had stopped, and the sun fought its way through the clouds. The town looked like it had been dipped in sugar, rooftops iced in white, the streets lined with leftover lights from the night before. Most people were still indoors, wrapping up leftovers, finishing stories around the tree, or maybe pretending they weren't disappointed. I tucked the envelope into my coat and stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay still. The silence in the house had started to sound too much like regret. As I wandered through the town, I passed by familiar places, the barber shop where Thomas got his first haircut, the library Anna used to love, the old diner where I once left work early just to surprise them with pancakes. Memories drifted in and out like fog, and every street I turned down whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. Then I reached the main avenue, the one lined with old street lamps and Christmas banners still swaying from the night before. It was a place that looked like it belonged in a postcard, cheerful, picturesque. But I wasn't here for the charm. I was looking for Noah. I don't know what made me think he'd come this way, but sometimes the heart leads before the mind catches up. And sure enough, near the fountain in the town square where families used to gather for carols and cocoa, I saw him. He was sitting on the edge of the old stone base, his legs swinging back and forth, looking up at the lights still strung across the trees. They were dim in the daylight, but something about them still held his gaze, like he was trying to remember what they looked like when they glowed. When he saw me, he stood up quickly, surprised. "I didn't take anything," he said, defensive. "I know," I said gently. "You just left early." He looked down. "Didn't want to bother you." "You weren't a bother, Noah." We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure what to say next. I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope. "You left this." His eyes widened, and he took a slow step back. "It's not for you," he whispered. I figured. I paused, watching him. "But maybe you can tell me who it's for." He swallowed hard. "It's for a man I've never met. My mom said he left before I was born. I wrote it last year, but I never sent it." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Didn't think he'd care. But I wanted to believe he might." Those words, wanted to believe, stuck to me like frost. Because that's all any of us ever want, isn't it? To believe someone cares. To believe we matter. I handed the letter back to him. Sometimes, I said, we write things not for the person who might read them, but for ourselves, because we need to say them out loud. He nodded slowly, tucking the envelope back into his pocket. You think he'd read it if I found him? I looked up at the gray sky, then back at him. I think if he has a heart at all, he'd hold on to every word. He sat back down, quieter now, thoughtful. I joined him. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leftover ribbons on the town's wreaths. Why were you out here last night? He asked suddenly. I looked at him, then down at my hands. Because my son told me there wasn't a place for me at his table. He blinked. But you're his dad. Yeah, I said. And sometimes that's not enough to fix what's broken. He was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Like he was trying to fit that sentence into his own world. You think it can be fixed? He asked after a while. I thought about Thomas, the look on his face, the way he closed the door gently, like he thought that would make it hurt less. I thought about all the times I should have said something and didn't. All the times I thought there would be more time. I think Christmas is the only time some things can be fixed, I said finally. Because it makes us remember how much we need each other. Noah stared at the snow-covered sidewalk, then reached into his pocket again and held the envelope tightly. Maybe I'll try. Maybe I will too, I whispered, though I wasn't sure he heard me. Then, as if answering a question neither of us had asked, the Christmas lights overhead flickered on again. The town square glowed, soft, golden, alive. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't lost anymore. Back at the house, Noah sat at the small wooden table, a pencil in one hand and the envelope laid carefully before him. He hadn't opened it yet, not even once, even though it was his handwriting on the front. He stared at it like it was a window he wasn't sure he wanted to look through. I watched him from across the room, unsure whether to interrupt. The fireplace crackled behind me, casting shadows that danced along the floor. I'd added another log not long ago, mostly just for the sound. It reminded me of something warmer than silence. After a while, he looked up. Do you ever write letters? I nodded, slowly. I used to, I said. To Anna, when I was on the road. I don't think I ever mailed half of them. Just kept them in my glove compartment. He tilted his head. Why didn't you send them? I smiled sadly. Because sometimes it's easier to write than to be read. When you send something, it becomes real. When you don't, it stays yours. He nodded like he understood, then lowered his eyes again. I moved to the chair beside him, careful not to crowd his space. Do you want to read it? I asked gently. He shook his head. No. I think I remember what I wrote. He traced the edges of the paper with his finger. I just don't know if it matters anymore. I leaned back. You know, when I was your age, I used to think letters were only about telling people things. But sometimes they're about letting go. He was quiet for a long time. Then, without warning, he pushed the envelope toward me. Will you read it? I hesitated. Are you sure? He nodded. You can pretend you're him. I took the envelope slowly, unfolding it like something sacred. The paper inside was wrinkled, a little torn at the corners. His handwriting was crooked and smudged in places, as if written with more heart than control. I cleared my throat and began to read aloud. Dear Dad, I don't know if you're still out there. Maybe you're in a place where it's warm. Maybe you forgot about me. That's okay. Mom says people leave for all kinds of reasons. But I just wanted to tell you that I'm not mad. I used to be. But now I just hope you're okay. I'm okay too. I go to school. I like drawing. I made a birdhouse last spring, and it didn't even fall apart. Sometimes I wonder what your voice sounds like. I wonder if we like the same kind of cereal. I eat the kind with the marshmallows. I hope, wherever you are, you're not alone tonight. I hope someone brought you hot chocolate. Merry Christmas. I miss you, even though I don't remember you. Love, Noah. My voice caught on the last sentence. I didn't mean to, but the room went silent again, the kind that wraps around you like a heavy coat. I looked up at him. He wasn't crying. He just looked tired, older than he should. Do you think he would have read it? He asked. I folded the letter and handed it back. I think any man with a soul would have read it 100 times. He nodded again, quietly slipping the paper back into the envelope and tucking it into his coat pocket like it was something living. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable now, just full of thought. You said you wrote letters too, he said after a while. To your wife. I smiled. Yeah. Most of them were just about little things. What the weather was like. What I ate. What I missed. He paused. Did she ever read them? Some, I said. Before she passed. The rest, I kept. I still have a few of them. He leaned forward. Can I see one? I blinked, caught off guard. I hadn't read them in years. But I stood up, walked to the small cabinet by the window, and pulled out a thin shoebox. Inside were a few folded pages, yellowed with time. I chose one dated Christmas Eve, 23 years ago, and brought it back. I cleared my throat and began. Anna, it's snowing hard tonight. The road's closed up past the ridge, so I'll be sleeping in the cab. I've got some cheap coffee and a blanket that smells like diesel, but it's better than nothing. I passed a little town earlier. Lights in every window, carolers on the corner, kids laughing. Made me miss you more than usual. Made me think about Thomas too. He'll probably be up early, tearing into those boxes you wrapped so carefully. I hope you save me a piece of pie. I know it won't taste the same tomorrow, but I'll pretend it does. I'm sorry I couldn't make it back in time. Next year I will. I promise. Merry Christmas, my love. Ed. When I finished, neither of us spoke. The fire popped, the house creaked in its old bones. Noah looked at me, his voice soft. Did you make it back the next year? I nodded. I did. But by then, Thomas had already started growing up without me. He didn't say anything, but I could feel his understanding settle between us, the kind only children of absence recognize. That night, we both wrote again. Not letters to send, but just words poured out on paper, like building bridges we hadn't dared cross before. I watched Noah fold his new letter, careful this time, his handwriting just a little steadier. You think I should find him? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. And if you can't, let him find you through the man you become. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but it didn't feel as cold anymore. Inside this little house, two strangers sat by a fire, not quite healed, but not broken either. And somewhere in that quiet, I felt it, not the sound of something ending, but something beginning. I don't remember the exact moment I decided to take Noah to the address he'd written on the back of that torn flyer he kept folded in his coat pocket, but sometime that morning, as the wind pushed against the windows and the sky grew heavier with more snow to come, I knew I couldn't let him walk that road alone. We caught the 9:40 bus, the only one still running on the holiday, and we sat side by side without saying much. He kept his forehead pressed to the fogged-up glass, eyes tracing the frozen fields and tired rooftops passing by. I watched the reflection of his face in the window, and for a moment, he looked like every child I had failed to understand in time. The bus moved slow, as if even it wasn't in a hurry to reach the end of its line. When we got off, the street was narrow and lined with brown trees that had long since lost their leaves. The houses were quiet, some with faint traces of music leaking through the walls, others completely still. There was a smell of wood smoke and something sweet in the air, maybe cinnamon or apples, or maybe just memory playing tricks on me again. We walked until we reached a small house with peeling paint and a wooden porch that sagged under the snow. There was a dried flower pot by the door and a plastic wreath still clinging to the front window. Noah didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at it like it was a painting he wasn't sure was real. I stayed a step behind him. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He just pulled the envelope from his pocket, the one he'd carried through the cold, through the night, through whatever years had taught him to stay quiet when he wanted to scream, and he slipped it gently under the door. Then he waited. We both did. We listened for footsteps, for voices, for a dog barking or a floorboard creaking. But nothing came. The house was silent, not in a cruel way, but in the kind of way that makes you understand that some answers won't ever be spoken out loud. He turned, walked down the steps, and we headed back the way we came. As we reached the corner, I looked up and stopped walking. My feet knew that house even before my eyes did. The stone porch I helped lay when my hands were still steady. The gate I painted one spring after too much silence had passed between us. The bushes trimmed with almost too much care. It was Thomas's house. I hadn't even realized we were that close. And then I saw the light on inside, soft, golden, the kind of light that makes people forget the cold. I stood frozen, and so did Noah. We didn't speak. We just stared at the house that had shut me out 24 hours ago like it had never been mine. Through the window, I saw silhouettes moving, quiet laughter, warmth I hadn't felt in years. But then I saw Thomas. He wasn't inside. He was leaning against his car, parked just beyond the driveway, his head down, hands in his coat pockets, his breath turning white in the air. And he was crying. Not the kind of crying people hear. The kind a man hides when he thinks no one is watching. The kind that only comes when you're tired of being strong. I didn't move. Neither did he. Then his eyes lifted, and he saw me. We both froze like we'd been caught in the middle of a dream we didn't want to admit was real. The snow started falling again, slow and soft like the sky didn't want to interrupt us. I could feel the weight of everything between us pressing against my chest. Years of missed birthdays, of empty seats at dinners, of words said wrong and others never said at all. I wanted to look away. I wanted to turn around and pretend I hadn't seen him, pretend I hadn't seen the tears, the shame, the son who once built blanket forts in my living room now standing outside his house like he didn't know how to walk back inside. But I didn't move. I watched him wipe his face quickly, glance toward the window like he didn't want Claire to see, then take a step toward me. Just one. Then another. He didn't say anything. His face was tight, his lips pressed like he was holding something that might break if he opened his mouth. But his eyes, they weren't angry anymore. They were tired. They were hurt. But beneath all that, they were reaching. And for the first time in years, so were mine. He didn't stop walking and I didn't step back. There we were, two men standing in the snow, neither knowing how to reach out without breaking into pieces. I could see the lines in his face that hadn't been there the last time we spoke for more than a minute. I saw the way he carried his shoulders, high and tense, like the world had been asking too much of him and he never knew how to say no. I wanted to speak first, but the words wouldn't come. They were all stuck in that space between guilt and pride where men like me tend to live too long. He stood in front of me now, not inches away, but years. And in those years were birthdays missed, phone calls ignored, 100 small disappointments that had turned into one long silence. But none of that mattered when I looked in his eyes and saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to run barefoot through the yard, the one who used to cry when he got lost in the grocery store and reach for my hand like it was the only thing that could bring him home. That boy wasn't gone. He was just buried under the weight of adulthood, responsibility, and all the things I didn't teach him because I thought being present meant paying bills and fixing things. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a breath. He looked down, wiped his face again, then finally said it, not loudly, not with anger, but with the kind of voice that's afraid of not being heard. I didn't mean it. The words hit me like a stone to the chest. I wanted to say I know, but I didn't. Because I didn't know. Not really. I'd spent the whole night believing I'd been pushed out like a stranger. He went on, still not looking at me, just talking to the snow, to the space between our shoes. Claire told me I was wrong. She always tells me when I'm wrong. She left the table right after you did. I nodded slowly, still waiting for the rest. He said she didn't recognize me when I said it. That I sounded like someone she wouldn't have married. She didn't even eat. I stood there, breathing in the cold, trying to keep the heat in my chest from turning into something messy. Then he looked up. His eyes were red, but his voice steadier now. I didn't want you to leave. I was angry. At myself. At the way things have been. At how far I let it all drift. But I didn't want to close the door. It just happened. I took a slow step forward. It wasn't much, but it was enough to close some of the space. I told him I was sorry. Not because I had it all figured out, but because that's where everything had to start. I said I should have been there more. I should have called more. Should have told him I missed him before he had to say it first. His face changed. Like something unclenched. He shook his head, and in that motion I saw the boy again. He whispered something that barely reached me. I just wanted you to come back. That was all. I wanted you to try. And I had. Not perfectly. Not with fireworks or speeches. But I'd come back. And there we were, two men too broken to say everything they meant but trying anyway, trying with the raw pieces we still had. He reached into his coat, pulled something out, and placed it in my hand. It was the box. The one I'd brought with me the night before. The one with the watch. I thought you might want this back, he said. But I don't. I want you to give it to Lily. When she's old enough. I looked at him and for the first time, he smiled. Just barely. But it was real. Then he stepped aside and looked at the door. It's still open, Dad. I turned toward the house, the warm light spilling out through the window like an invitation that had never really been revoked. I looked back at him. His eyes were still waiting. And I knew that if I walked away now, it wouldn't just be the end of the night. It would be the end of something I might never get back. So I nodded. And I walked toward the house. The house felt warmer than I remembered, not just from the fire burning quietly in the living room, but from the way the air shifted when I crossed the threshold, like the walls had been holding their breath waiting for me to return. I hadn't been in that house since Thomas and Claire moved in 6 years earlier, back when everything still felt polite and uncertain, back when I brought them a toolbox as a housewarming gift because I didn't know how to say I was proud. I stepped inside slowly, my boots wet against the hardwood floor, and the scent hit me all at once: pine needles, roasted meat, something sweet like cinnamon and butter. The kind of scent that only exists on Christmas night, when everything has been prepared not just to be eaten, but to mean something. Claire appeared from the hallway first. Her eyes found mine, wide and unsure, but kind. She walked to me without saying a word, reached out, and touched my shoulder gently, not like a greeting, but like an apology that didn't need to be spoken. I nodded. She smiled, and I felt a part of myself that had been locked up start to loosen. Then I heard her voice, Lily. Small, bright, calling from the other room about something on the tree. Her little feet pattered across the floor, and when she saw me, she stopped. We'd only met twice before, once at her first birthday and once on a random afternoon visit when Thomas had to run an errand and didn't expect me to stay. But she looked up at me now like she knew who I was. She said, "Grandpa?" with a question in her voice that shattered me more than anything Thomas had said the night before. I didn't speak. I just knelt down, held out my arms, and when she ran into them, I let myself feel it. All of it. The missed years. The silence. The aching regret. The fear that maybe I'd never be here again. I held her close and she giggled, wrapping her tiny arms around my neck like nothing had ever been broken to begin with. That's when Thomas entered the room behind her. He didn't say anything either. Just looked at me holding his daughter, and something deep in his face, the hardness he'd worn since his teenage years, finally cracked. Claire took Lily to the kitchen with some excuse about checking the pie, and it was just me and Thomas, standing there in the soft light of the living room. He pointed toward the dining table and I followed. It was set perfectly, with more food than I'd seen in years, and at the end, there was a chair pulled back, a plate set, a napkin folded just like the others. He hadn't removed it. He hadn't cleared it after I left. It had been waiting there all along. I sat down slowly, my heart racing in a way I hadn't felt since Anna was alive. Thomas took the seat across from me. Claire returned with Lily and the pie, and we all sat in silence for a few seconds that felt like a lifetime. Then, slowly, they began passing the dishes, pouring the wine, filling the space with small gestures that meant far more than words. At one point, Lily held up a cracker shaped like a star and said she'd saved it for someone special, then placed it on my plate. I nodded, eyes stinging, hands shaking just slightly as I picked it up and took a bite like it was the finest thing I'd ever been given. There were no speeches, no forced apologies, no dramatic toasts. Just a quiet meal shared by a family that had almost let go of each other. But hadn't. Not completely. As the evening went on, I told stories. Not long ones, just enough to make Lily laugh and Claire smile. Thomas listened. Really listened. Not with that distant, distracted look he used to wear, but with eyes that followed every word like he was trying to learn something he thought he'd lost. After dinner, while Claire took Lily upstairs to prepare for bed, Thomas and I stayed at the table. We didn't speak. We just sat there, two men with too much behind them, and maybe not enough time left ahead. But something had shifted. Something had returned. A chair pulled out again. A plate never cleared. A father who stayed. I woke before the sun the next morning, not from noise or restlessness, but from something inside me that felt full for the first time in years. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache, but holds. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb anyone, and found myself in the living room again, the tree lights still blinking gently, casting soft colors against the walls like whispers from the night before. I sat in the same chair where I'd held Lily, the same chair that had felt like an anchor after floating too far for too long. I looked around that room and saw the remnants of a night I never thought I'd live to see again, a half-finished puzzle on the side table, Lily's tiny shoes near the stairs, a plate of leftover cookies someone forgot to cover. Everything simple. Everything sacred. I reached into my coat and pulled out the letter. Not Noah's, mine. The one I wrote in my head during all those nights I was too afraid to knock, too proud to say I still hoped he missed me. I had written it in silence, over years, in the pauses between phone calls, in the way I'd say I was fine when I wasn't. I didn't need to read it anymore. I just folded it once more, left it neatly beside Thomas's coffee mug on the counter, and turned toward the door. I didn't plan to leave without saying goodbye, not out of drama or old habit, but because goodbyes didn't mean the same anymore. What mattered had already been said, or felt, or held in the quiet of that dinner table when no one dared to speak too loudly in case it all disappeared. Outside, the air was cold but calm, the snow untouched from the night before. I walked slowly, not in a rush, not escaping, just letting the morning hold me for a little while. I passed houses with their lights still twinkling, a child's bike tipped over near a porch, the smell of bacon and pine slipping through kitchen vents. And I thought about Noah. I didn't know where he'd gone after leaving that letter under the door, but something told me he'd find his way. Maybe that man would read the words his son had written and realize what I almost didn't, that sometimes we don't get second chances wrapped in ribbons, we get them in small voices, quiet gestures, and long walks through snow. I didn't go far. Just to the edge of town, where the bus station waited, empty and humming faintly with heat. I sat on the bench outside, watching my breath drift up into the morning light, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough to remember the weight of my wife's laughter, the way Thomas used to fall asleep in the car before we'd even left the driveway, the sound of Lily's voice when she called me Grandpa like it was a name that had been waiting its turn. Later that afternoon, Claire would find the letter. She'd open it with careful hands and read the words I finally managed to write. I didn't say much. Just enough. I told them I was proud. That I loved them in ways I didn't know how to show before. That I wasn't leaving out of sadness, but out of gratitude. That sometimes a father has to go so a son can feel what it means to bring him home. Months would pass before Thomas called. And when he did, he didn't ask where I'd gone. He just said Lily missed me. That she was building something and wanted me to see it. That there was a room in the house they hadn't touched yet, waiting for whenever I was ready. And maybe one day I'll walk back through that door. Maybe I already have, in some way. Because the miracle of Christmas wasn't in the gifts or the lights or the meal shared between regrets and forgiveness. It wasn't in the nativity scene on the mantle or the hymn sung off-key or even the star lily placed too low on the tree. It was in the plate left untouched. In the chair pulled back. In the letter never mailed but finally read. In the boy on the bench. In the son who finally looked up. And in the man who stayed just long enough to be remembered. Not as the father who left, but as the one who came back.